Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people across this great state of Mississippi who are working so hard to make this such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, listen, I've said this before, and I've posted about it as well, that I'm a Lane Kiffin fan, and not because he's a football coach, even though you got to enjoy Ole Miss these days. They got to win out, and it's going to be fun kind of seeing where this team goes. But I like Lane Kiffin because of the world that he shares, the life that he shares in his social media world. And something he posted recently really kind of got my attention. What I can tell you about Lane Kiffin, if you're not on social media, you're not following him on X or some of the other social media platforms, is that he kind of lets it all hang out there. I'll give you a really great example. When he is doing his recruiting, incidentally, you may know of him that he really embraced the whole NIL transfer portal world rapidly. And while other sort of old school coaches were struggling with it, he embraced it and went with it. But he would post photos of the jet landing in Starkville, for example. They were going there to talk to somebody. Of course, he wouldn't say he was meeting with, but he would drive other coaches crazy trying to figure out, now, what is Lane up to? Very aggressive recruiter. But he posted this recently, and here's what he said ahead of it, incidentally. He said, I'm going to share a saying with you, but here's what he said of this saying. He said, "This is very true. I can tell you firsthand, thanks to my life journey. Have a great Monday, everyone. Never too late to change. Won't be easy at all. And you will want to quit a lot and go back to your comfortable old days, but it will be worth it." And then he says, "Can promise you that." And here's what he shared. He said, "A wise person once said, what you achieve isn't as important as who you become in the process, because the growth you experience along the way lasts far longer than any accomplishment. True success lies in the transformation, not the trophy." I think that it actually touched me a lot, because my son Justin, who works for Price Waterhouse, sent me something that he wrote recently, and he was talking about achieving goals and how to go about achieving goals. And he says people too often focus on the goal. It could be a financial goal, a career goal, even a personal goal. The point that he made in this thing that he wrote is that we should be actually more focused on the transformation, that becoming a different person, in the process of becoming a different person, you position yourself to achieve success as it relates to your goals, but that transformation is something that is more permanent, and it really is. It gives you the opportunity to become someone you weren't before in the process. And so I thought what he shared today, true success lies in the transformation, not the trophy. That's just an example of some of the things he posts. And so for that reason, I'm kind of a fan of his. That was from Lane Kiffin. So now let's shift gears. I've been looking forward to circling back. We haven't visited in a while. My friend Ashley Edwards, he's a former CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's an entrepreneur. He's not only a SuperTalk news contributor, but he actually sits in to some of those statewide SuperTalk chairs from time to time. And he's someone that I just enjoy, catching up with and talking about current events. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really well, Ricky, and enjoyed the wisdom you started off the show with. I must admit, though, I am just petty enough as a Southern Miss fan that I'm not going to give Lane Kiffin any credit, but I do see the statesmanship in your comments there.
Listen, I said recently, my son, we're all Southern Miss graduates, Jordan, Tori, Ann, and I. My son Justin went to Auburn. And even when Jordan went to law school at Ole Miss, look, I had been there before. When I was young, spent some time there throughout my career. Would go to a game with someone from time to time. Of course, SuperTalk, they're big Ole Miss fans. The key managers and owners of SuperTalk. But you know this, Ashley. We were taught to hate Ole Miss when you were at Southern Miss. I mean, especially when we played Ole Miss. We just talked. It was in my DNA not to like Ole Miss. It really was. So when Jordan went to Ole Miss Law School, when our kids and when Justin was at Auburn, we used the football games as an opportunity to go spend time with our sons. That's what we did. And so when Jordan was in law school, we went to a lot of games and spent a lot of time up there. And we kind of hated it less. we enjoyed the Grove experience a little bit more. We could run into old friends and whatever. So over time, I've kind of, I don't know, I've muted some of my hate. And now I'm kind of what's best for Mississippi, and with Ole Miss playing well, it's going to be fun. And with this new playoff scheme that we have in college football, it'll be fun to watch and have somebody to root for. And you got to admit it, you're probably going to root for them too.
Well, look, I can admit my wife and I went up to Oxford for my birthday a couple of years ago. First time we've been up there in quite some time, and it's a great city. They've been fun to watch. I've watched several games this year. I will have to burn all copies of this tape, even saying anything nice about those guys. But the older you get, the less and less that sort of pull comes in there. But look, I tell people all the time, and I've got a lot of good friends that are Ole Miss fans. There's nothing to make you bitter like an inferiority complex. And given how poorly Southern Miss has been showing up on the football field the last few years, my inferiority complex is at an all-time high in college football. So, but hey, good on Ole Miss. I was actually in Atlanta around a group of Georgia fans at a bar where it was filled with Georgia fans when they beat Georgia. So I can't lie and tell you that I didn't have a little pride swell at seeing my home state team win that game.
There you go. You're softening your stance. I was at the hunting camp, and so our friends, the Dunn family, just great friends of ours up in the Mississippi Delta, and man, they're big Ole Miss fans. But Travis was with me at the hunting camp, and other members of the family and lots of friends were at the game. And of course, they stormed the field. They were on the field, and Jackson Dunn, who plays football at where does he play? High school at Pillow Academy for sure, and he plays basketball there as well. He told me last weekend that he they stormed the field, but then had to get off the field, and then they restormed the field again. But he was Travis during that aftermath of the game was people were texting pictures of what was going on the field. It was a big game because they had to win that game to have an opportunity to win it out. I mean, everyone knew that, and there's a lot of pride in that, and it's good for Mississippi. So I'm gonna follow them closely. But yeah, I still got this thing in the back of my head, seeing that little symbol I used to pin on my jacket that said "Go to hell, Ole Miss." But I'm sure they sold thousands of those at Southern Miss back in the days we were playing them. I'm sure of that.
Well, you think about just the changing landscape of college football. I mean, there's no doubt about it that in terms of just an on the field product, the SEC is second to none. I was in college in the late '90s when Southern Miss was really at its pinnacle. And I have no doubt in my mind, I mean, I'll take this to my grave. If Ole Miss had played us every year, we would have wiped the floor with them back in those days. And so there was a lot of, I think, hatred around the fact that we didn't get a chance to show our mettle against a team like that. Fast forward now 27 years later, and I sure am glad that we don't have to have anything to do with them on that field, because it wouldn't be pretty.
Well, this is not a conversation about NIL, but I will mention that, as we now know, Mississippi College has changed their name to Mississippi Christian University, and they are eliminating their football program. And I think there's some recognition there. There's a lot being said about it, especially from former football players that have a lot of pride in that long history of football at Mississippi College. That it's hard for a Mississippi College in this day and time to be competitive. And I worry about Southern Miss, Ashley. I know we've talked about this before. I really worry about but the rise of University of South Alabama football, and we're pulling from a lot of the same areas, and that program's hanging on pretty well. And Southern Miss has been declining rapidly. They're going to have a football program. Southern Miss has to have a football program.
Well, it's difficult because the resources. I mean, it's a whole new ball game now, and it's hard for me, in my pragmatic mind, to look into the future and really see a path forward for how we're able to continue to compete at that level. I hope that there are some structural changes to college football as time goes on. I think it's been difficult really since the dissolution of kind of the Conference USA version 1. When Southern Miss played with Cincinnati and Louisville and TCU, and I mean, you just think about how great of a conference that was. I mean, heck, when we were playing basketball in the Metro in the 1980s against Florida State, I mean, we're a long way from those days now.
Yeah, at the time, I don't think we fully appreciated that conference. What do we now? Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. I want to know what it's like to sit in a chair at SuperTalk on live radio. We'll see what he has to say about that in just a second. See you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We have Ashley Edwards with us today. He's an entrepreneur, former CEO of Gulf Coast Business Council, but he's a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi Media, and has actually sat in for some of the statewide radio shows before. And I'm actually really curious, Ashley. I know they set it up so that you could actually do the show from the studio down here on the coast. I think you went there once to do it as well. What did it feel like to do 3 solid hours of hosting one of those shows?
Well, it's an interesting experience. I was very nervous going into it, as I think anybody would be. Just because you don't know what you don't know. Obviously worried about being able to fill that amount of time with talking. Of course, my wife would say that 3 hours should be no problem for me to talk. But I think what I found in doing it is, it's the time goes by much more quickly than you would think. I mean, it goes by in a blast. But the difficult thing, I think, is just kind of managing all the various computer monitors you have in front of you and staying abreast of how quickly a break is coming up and making sure that you're ready to go back into the intro. There's a lot of balls to juggle at the same time, and so you really have to have kind of a multitasking mind when you do those live shows. And I'll tell you the other thing that I wasn't expecting, but the C Spire text line. So you're actually getting feedback in real time as what you're saying and what the listeners are kind of thinking. And it's interesting because as you see those texts coming in and people are commenting on what you just said, it's making you second guess what you're talking about. And obviously, one negative comment can have an oversized kind of impact in your mind compared to maybe what everybody else is hearing. So, it is not a job for the faint of heart by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it is a lot of fun. I mean, something's very, really enjoyable to do.
I remember early in the process. Well, first of all, the first time that I started this show, the very first show, we did it live from the studio. We did it live for a couple of months. The plan was to get used to doing radio, and then they were going to help build a studio at the house, which we have now. And I would then do the shows from the house. And then COVID pushed that, and we kind of moved a little bit quicker to the remote nature of this show. But I remember the first time I did the show. The very first, I'm trying to remember. It seemed like the first show was Joe Cloyd. That was my very first, because I needed somebody I knew really well and I could be very comfortable with. And then, man, after that, it was George Slogel and Haley Barber and I'm trying to think, John Hairston, and I mean just Jerry St. Pay. Just a long list of stalwarts here in coastal Mississippi. But I was literally scared to death because I believe I've had a good grasp of coastal Mississippi and where we've been, but I had been retired for over 4 years at the time, man. I didn't realize how quickly I'd be able to recall the file names in my mind of certain subjects. But once I started to develop confidence that, no, I haven't forgotten all that I learned when I was working in the community and a publisher, after a week or two, I started to kind of feel comfortable with it and realize that if you're not, you got to be super authentic. People will pick up so fast if you're not. You can't fake it. You can't pretend you know something when you don't, because as you know from that ceasefire text line or just from social media alone, if you say something that's not right or you say something that's a little bit too far out there, the tribe or the community will very quickly call you on it. And if you do it too often, you won't have a career in radio. I mean, it's just authenticity is so important. And then somebody said to me earlier, I think it was Steve Davenport, the owner of SuperTalk, said, just remember, it's just like sitting at the dinner table having a conversation with someone and you're letting, a few thousand people listen in. And, the 1,000 was a little bit hard to get your head around, but then the reality of just sitting at the dinner table having a conversation with someone, once I got that in my head, it was okay. But look, man, about 2 weeks into it, I had to do a live remote sitting in for, I can't remember if it was JT Mitchell or JT show, not Mitchell, JT show, or Paul show, where I did 3 solid hours. And that was that was scary. So I know what you're talking about. But man, you're a natural at it. There's no doubt about it, Ashley. I've enjoyed listening to you, and the guests that we have are dynamic, and there's so many different places we can go in these conversations, and people like the long form conversations for sure.
Well, look, I think this is such a valuable thing for society as a whole, because at the end of the day, we've changed the way that we get our media. We've changed the way that we get our information. We often hear people talk about how we kind of live in a post-truth world, and I think that's very true to some extent. And to your point, Ricky, I think people can see right through you if you're not giving them your truth, if you're not giving them your authenticity. And sometimes I think people will have some grace for you if they can see, hey, this person is giving me some heartfelt, authentic truth as opposed to performing, even if they don't agree with you. And so, just allowing people to have the opportunity to kind of listen in to various viewpoints, to listen in to a little more in-depth discussion, getting into minutia of some of these issues is a good thing. And it's, I was never a big radio listener before I started, doing more of the SuperTalk shows. In the time that since then, it's really amazing to me just how widespread the impact is and how many people are listening in.
Yeah,
it's something that it's a lot of people are listening to this show.
I think even more so going forward, it's going to be interesting to see. I think the tides in America are such that a locally owned organization like SuperTalk Mississippi Media can find a very significant competitive advantage and grow their audience. It's not just radio's the king, I always say that, but across social media platforms and the podcast side of it, again, people want depth. Listen, I'll tell you something interesting. I was listening to Joe Rogan the other day, and he was talking about the celebrities that are leaving X because they're mad at X. And one of the points that he made was this, that, you shouldn't get on X if you don't want to hear what people think. Okay. So what was happening with celebrities that might be very liberal in their point of view, the old X, they were actually canceling some conservative voices. They were actually not letting many straightforward, maybe differing points of view. And in a lot of ways, you think about it, celebrities are kind of protected in a way. They have these people around them that protect them. And on the old Twitter, they were somewhat protected. Well, since the kimono's been lifted on X and it's the Wild West again in terms of free speech, they may disagree. A celebrity who's leaving, they may disagree with what the tide shift politically, what's happening there. But they also just don't like the Wild West of X because they're used to being protected. And the other thing is that he would say, for example, the other example he gave was an anchor on TV. Well, anchors on TV are personalities. They're reading scripts. So when you finally get them on X and they have to share their own thoughts, and sometimes they're not very good at it, to be honest with you. And one of the things he said, that if you want a high profile and you're stupid, it's not going to go well for you on X. And so, I just found that kind of interesting, that But what I like ultimately is that we have free speech and authenticity. You and I have talked about this 1,000 times on this show, but dude, it's playing out in front of our very eyes. That is for sure.
Well, it's fascinating to me, Ricky, because I just think back to when Elon Musk first bought X and the conversations we had early on about what this evolution was going to look like, and I mean we're seeing that play out. And look, I think free speech is a great thing, but I think it also comes with a high dose of responsibility. You know, I mean, I am concerned sometimes when I get on X, and I'm a frequent user of X, and in no danger of leaving it. Certainly, I use it all the time, but I get concerned sometimes, and I feel like my feed maybe has got algorithms behind it that's pushing certain viewpoints, maybe to try to make up ground for other viewpoints that may have been pushed or canceled out. And, what I really want is just an open platform. What I don't want is anybody engineering those outcomes, whether it be, pro-right or pro-left. And so I think that vigilance is always going to be necessary, but I'll say something a little controversial here. And it's something that's always in the back of my mind. And I think it's something I just ask people to keep in their mind. And that is, we live in this digital free-for-all now. And, we talk about free speech and the value of free speech, and there's no question that it is a fundamental tenet of freedom and liberty and American life. But I think we also have to understand the value that we place on individual opinions, because most of what people try to sell as opinions or try to place value in really are emotional reactions that come from ignorance rather than information or facts. And so, the good thing, and free speech, I think it's one of those things, it's earned citizenship. It challenges you, because it means that there's going to be things out there sometimes that don't necessarily have value. And so the responsibility is with each of us to be able to wade through it and understand the difference.
It is. And I'll relate that back to my own experience as a publisher here when we come back on the other side, because it's really an important part of the conversation. And we'll actually talk about the role media is playing these days. Some of them are going crazy. We'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards when we come back on the other side. See you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We have Ashley Edwards with us. He's a Coast entrepreneur, someone who sits in from time to time at SuperTalk. He's a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi Media and SuperTalk News, but he's also a regular on the show, and we just talk about things. But Ashley, I had this wonderful conversation with Dave Elliott recently, who, as you know, was essentially fired from WLOX for expressing some conservative views on his personal acts, not branded WLOX in any way. And he revealed on my show, in fact, that he had been in conversation with WXXV for months. And then next Monday, actually, he starts as an anchor at WXXV. He wonders, he said on my show, whether they had gotten wind of it, and that was what was behind it. But we had a really good conversation about local news and the changing media landscape, a lot of stuff that you and I have talked about before. But let me tell you, what's interesting is whether you're talking about making news decisions in a central location, like in New York by ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CBS, where you're talking about that, or whether you're talking about a company like Gray Media that has 131 TV stations around the country, where there's some local stuff that's happening. They're trying to create some economies of scale in some central location in Atlanta or whatever. Whether it's something like that, or whether it's just a local newspaper, to be honest with you, but where you have editors that are filtering the information that people need to see. The old days, if you think back on it now, the amount of filtering that was going on about whether something was news or not news. I remember I've heard conversations by editors that said something like, should we let that editorial run? Is Coastal Mississippi ready to hear that or read that? I mean, think about that for a minute. Those conversations took place pretty regularly, man. So we have people who have their own biases making decisions about what we can see. I would much rather have X. I'd much rather see it from the citizen journalist point of view. And your point about, whether it's emotional or whether it's good opinion or whatever, these are all the things that people start to figure out. A lot of times the crowd will help us figure that out. Community notes feature of X is a good feature, incidentally. It's to me, it's a bit of a game changer in some respects. But I think what X has provided, it's interesting, too, that as these people leave, these celebrities leave X, and these hardcore Democrats leave X to go to Blue Sky and whatever, X's traffic continues to grow dramatically. So we're in a new place, and there's no turning back now. And you and I have said that 1,000 times before, but it's more so today than it ever was. I mean, you see that clearly, don't you?
Oh, no question about it. I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, this is going to be the new reality going forward, and the likelihood is that a digital public town square, humanity square, so to speak, is going to be part of human reality, long after you and I are gone. I mean, this is the new normal. And so, and it's going to go through iterations. I mean, I remember listening to a lecture one time from a high school teacher of mine, a guy by the name of Coach Cy Thompson, who just was a really, really smart guy. And he talked about the dialectical change that occurs through human history and the way that shifts. And in many ways, the archaeologists of 1,000 years from now, God help us if human race makes it that far, they're not going to be so worried about the relics in the ground. They're going to be looking back at this digital archive of the sort of the dialectical history of our times. And, what was the popular sentiment? What were the type of things that we're talking about? And we're living in this kind of revolutionary change right now where establishment media is going the way of the dinosaur and being replaced with social media. And when you think about what social media means, it really just means, the media of the populace. And that is what we now see. This last presidential election, I mean, if there is any doubt left in people's mind that the power of the establishment media is essentially gone, I would be surprised if anybody could look at what has just happened. I mean, arguably, Joe Rogan was the most powerful media figure in this presidential election. And that challenges me, Ricky, because if you had asked me 6 months ago, how much would Joe Rogan's endorsement or having someone on Joe Rogan's show move the needle, I would have told you not at all. So it goes to show even I'm starting to overcome my ignorance and just sort of, really believing what my own eyes are seeing now. But I think this last presidential election will be a demarcation line in history where you really started to see that massive shift over from the establishment media or the traditional media to sort of the new media.
I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, one of the things that has really fascinated me has been the Morning Joe show, and what their positions have been. Because you look, just look back a little bit. Joe Scarborough, who's a former representative from Florida, when Hurricane Katrina hit coastal Mississippi, he set up live in Biloxi, and for a long time actually did a show from here to bring attention to what was happening in coastal Mississippi. I met him. He was a good guy and all this stuff, but then he turned in a big way in an anti-Trump kind of scenario, and his show became something different. And to see that he and Mika have gone to visit with Trump, and to look at, this is a couple of headlines. MSNBC staffers lash out at their Morning Joe co-host, stun viewers with Trump meeting. Then here's another one, more like morning, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
I mean, people just lashing out at the fact that they had this, characterizing the meeting as cowardice and disgusting. But frankly, not unsurprising. And the list just goes on and on, needing to kiss the ring and whatever. But here's the thing. I think what the Morning Joe show became, incidentally, Andy Lack, who was the former chairman of NBC, who started Mississippi Today, who's very anti-conservative in Mississippi. That's a whole story in and of itself. But Andy Lack is the guy who created the Rachel Maddow show and helped make The Morning Joe be what it is. But all of those shows are kind of cut in the same kind of mold. Extremely anti-conservative, especially anti-Trump. And, does that hold water anymore? I think the point that you're making, as hard as they worked against Trump, as hard as they worked against conservative and Republicans, they failed miserably because they did not understand what was happening. And the question ultimately is, who's actually making the decisions at MSNBC and CNN and these other channels? How much control does a talking head really have over what's being said? So the media control in a centralized place, I think we're seeing a decentralization in ways that we may never go back again.
Well, I think what's so fascinating about the time we're living in now, and I'll use Trump as an example of this. I think people ought to look real deeply at his background in reality television and the way that has informed his decision making. Because in many ways, the Democrats have continued to rely on the traditional media, hoping that would sort of give them the support that they needed to maintain popular acceptance. What Trump has done is continued doing. I mean, look at the cabinet nominations he's making. What he values really more than policy chops or anything else, and maybe in some cases even the rule of law, is the ability for people to kind of be new media superstars, people that can go on Fox News and who get lots of clicks and who get lots of followers online. And he has embraced this past presidential election, the podcasters that were being listened to in massive numbers by really his base and the people he was trying to get energized. And then you add all that up and you look at the results of the election, and what that tells you is there really is a new political strategy. I mean, at the end of the day, my old boss, Haley Barber, well, has always said, politics is about winning elections. And if we judge the success or failure of political strategy by whether or not you can win election, then the new political strategy is really centered around having spokespeople and mouthpieces that are able to exist in the new media world and who are able to connect with the base that you're looking to get out, and not appealing to the popular media. Because if you look at at the sort of traditional media coverage of Donald Trump, of his cabinet appointments or anything else, you would have thought that he would have lost the race by 20 points. I mean, he had no friends or supporters among that group outside of really a handful of people at Fox News. But there's no question that really the Trump movement and the MAGA movement found a lot of power in leading that sort of public narrative, and they're using the new media to do that. So this is a demarcation line historically, and politicians that don't learn this lesson do that at their own risk, because I don't know that we'll ever have another national election going forward that doesn't look like the last one did in terms of a winning strategy.
Yeah, the changes are enormous. If there was a tsunami before, the tsunami is bigger and even more destructive now on media as we know it. There's literally no doubt in my mind about that. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. If you're a regular listener, you know this. I can't help it. The changing media landscape is something that fascinates me. I read everything I can get my hands on about it. It's incredibly dynamic. And Ashley is someone who's a former journalist. He's watched it and read carefully about it as well. But Ashley, here's the thing I miss. I tell my wife this almost every day as I watch this administration begin to unfold, is there'll never be another Trump again. I just can't imagine there being another Trump. When you think about, rightfully or wrongfully, all the attacks that have been on him, from trying to take his life to everything else and all points in between, he rose above all of that. What kind of man can rise above all that? I have no idea. But what he was doing, and I think he was brilliant when he in the way that he did it, is he's saying to Republicans that if you stay there in that place, that space you're in, you're never going to win another national election. And he drugged them, kicking and screaming to the middle, and brought the working class into the conversation and was able to speak to them in ways that that no one's been able to speak to them before. And it's a true revolution. It's going to be interesting to watch it all play out when it's all said and done. But he understood inherently that the way he engages, as you pointed out before we went to the break, the new media in these conversations, like Joe Rogan, but not just Joe Rogan. He was on a number of different podcasts that appealed to different audiences. The fact that he did it and the way he did it and the way he was able to just overcome all of that to the point that even you have African-American football players on NFL football fields doing the Trump dance is almost like they couldn't say before where they stood on this, and now they can. I don't even still understand where all this is going, but to be able to where you and I might have been a few months ago, evaluating it within sort of the buckets of the typical political observation, all of that way of analyzing it has been exploded now. We're in a whole different place, and it fascinates the heck out of me.
Well, I think there's no doubt. I think if you got an honest answer from anybody in Kamala Harris's campaign, they would tell you the biggest misstep in the closing days of the campaign was her not going and spending 3 hours on the Joe Rogan podcast. You know, Trump, as of this morning, I think was up by like 1.7 points nationally. There's obviously still counting some votes. You know, would it have changed the election? Probably not. But I think you would have seen that margin probably grow smaller because I think it worked against her. I think, you know, Joe Rogan may not have made an endorsement had she come on that podcast. He may have had a follow-up show in which he had said, wow, you know, I spent 3 hours with her and I view her differently, which could have led some people down a different path. And so I think that was a huge misstep. And it shows, frankly, an ignorance of or almost a fear of what Trump has embraced. And there's no question that he's gotten the advantage of doing that. I mean, I think it is absolutely insane. And I'll tell you something else, Ricky, something else I was reading a little bit about the other day, and it was the number of people in AOC's district, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district, who voted for both she and Donald Trump. And what that demonstrates is these are not policy voters. They're not ideologues. They're not partisan. What they're really voting on is who seems authentic or real. And so for someone to go in a voting booth and vote for both AOC and Donald Trump simultaneously demonstrates that the value that they are voting on primarily is authenticity or relatability. Who's someone that gets me or seems authentic to me, rather than, you know, any kind of deep, you know, policy wonkiness that might be there. And I think that's a hell of a lesson, really, when you look at the future of politics, especially these national races, because the time of the traditional politician is over.
It really is.
You know, it's just going to be very difficult for someone who is a traditional suit to get the kind of support nationally to win an election. And so, well,
hey, listen, you're right. I mean, it's the same thing we were saying about being on radio, that if you can't fake it anymore. Politicians could fake it in the past. They could have all these people in front of them, you know, making out to be somebody they aren't. To come on a radio show like this, or to go on a podcast platform, anything that's long form, and have no preconceived thoughts about where the conversation is going to go, you as a candidate have to be ready to demonstrate who you are. And I would tell you one of the most brilliant things that Trump did, one of the most brilliant things that J.D. Vance did, was to join Theo Von on his podcast. Theo Von, you know, he's crude, he's this, he's that, but man, I love the kid. You're talking about authentic, and he's had Bernie Sanders and all these different people, but the people that he's speaking to is a group of people that Trump needed to get to, and J.D. Vance needed to get to. And his conversation with J.D. Vance, man, it was a brilliant conversation. If you haven't seen it, you got to go back and listen to it. It's just, they go everywhere. J.D. Vance is authentic and smart as hell, and you get an understanding that some of the buckets that people tried to put him in, he wasn't going to allow himself to be put there. It was just brilliant. We could go on and on, but, you know, we're out of time for the day. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, my friend.
Ricky, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for always the great conversation.
You bet. You bet. This has been Ashley Edwards. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.